Are we live? Yeah. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of On That Point. Today, we are all in celebration of Pakistan team's absolutely phenomenal performance at not the World Cup, at WSDC and pre-tournaments. Pak team has been doing us all proud. Pak team over this last weekend broke top at Everest pre-WSDC, had the top three speakers of the tournament, with Hania winning her second best speaker overall in an international tournament. And Park Reserve went on to make the finals of an international tournament. Before this, Park team has also won the Penn WSDC, made it to the finals of the Princeton WSDC, where once again both times best speakers were from Pakistan, Hania and Hajra, respectively. This has probably been one of the most successful build up to WSDC that any Pak team has in history. And for that, today, we have Taha Imike Masood, Ali Shahid Afridi Khan, and Imad Saeed Ajmal Hassan Jafri to discuss Pak team, the current season for Pakistan, debating as a whole, and much more on this episode of On That Point. We'll start off with Taha Imike Masood, who started it all for Pakistani debate and international tournaments, to talk a bit about like this wonderful run.
I didn't, but that's good enough. I think actually, Ashar, you're incorrect in saying this is probably the most successful lead up for a Pakistan team in history. This is indisputably the most successful lead up for a Pakistan team in history. I think this is the first Pak team to have ever won any international tournament ever. Like, they've won domestic tournaments before in their lead up runs, but this is the first time that they've just consistently been going up against other WSDC teams at international tournaments and winning or coming finalists really consistently. Obviously, they haven't been to WSDC itself yet, so we can't say where their final run will rank, but I would be pretty confident in saying this is already one of the best Pak teams in history, just empirically. And I think it's made even bigger of a deal by the fact that, like, WSDC, like historical, very good deep Pak team runs, were often in the non-power pairing format. I forget what you call it, but the one where everybody was like pre-allocated a bunch of matchups and pools. That was less competitive. Like, this team has been going through a bunch of power paired, power ranked tournaments and still breaking top, winning tournaments, coming in the finals and stuff. It's already, I think, thrashed most historical records. So excited to see how they do
So
at Worlds.
obviously we're not yet sure how this team will do at WSDC, but I think there's a general acceptance on amongst people that this is probably one of the strongest like contingent that we've ever sent, and on paper potentially most likely to get something great coming up. Imad, what do you think is like the reason why we've sort of like come up with a team this good? Is it sheer coincidence we just happen to have 10 great speakers on the circuit, or do you think there's more?
Yeah, before I go into that, I also want to give a shout out to all the judges who broke at tournaments this weekend. So the Park Debate Forum boys at Uhuru and Everest, and Dawood also at Everest. Good to see that other people are also sort of breaking and ranking up adjudicator breaks as well.
Yeah, I
A
think
couple
Hamza
of years ago, they
Javed
were.
judged the Uhuru ESL final, which is a very
Oh
big deal because
yeah, yeah,
Uhuru is, I think, the biggest tournament in history by some margin.
yep.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Yeah, definitely. So that's also, pretty good to see. On that, I think that um, just like university debaters, and we've talked about this before, I think these kids have also benefited a lot from the decentralization, sort of democratization of debate resource and access, like in terms of online. I know that these students were speaking online, even at the tail end of COVID, etc. But I think that, well, we can also, I think, attribute to the fact that all of them are sort of um, have been recruited, and we've sort of gotten a dream school team by a particular institution. And I think that obviously, good or bad, at the very least, concentrates very good students in a particular place, which allows them to be coached by some very good individuals, and then therefore makes them a very strong and cohesive team overall. And I think like this competition that they face is also pretty good for them, because I'm quite certain that the international school circuit has also become more competitive for the same reason, because of things like online debate and the increased access, etc., which in turn and then has probably perhaps motivated these students and has probably pushed them to sort of focus on their strengths even more. So yeah, I mean, it's been fantastic to see, and I hope to continue to see more of it.
Nawaz, similar question to you, but with like a more focus on the coaching aspect of it, because like Hassan Kasser obviously is now probably one of the longest serving coaches on the circuit, and beyond that, like he's probably also the most successful one. Do you think it's just that, or do you think it's from what you've seen of the kids, it's something special that just these kids have?
I mean, Son definitely has something to do with it. There's no way that these kids would. It would be wrong to say that these kids' success has nothing to do with Hassan because of the sheer amount of ISL kids that are on team, and the sheer number of wins that they rack up, all of those things. And a lot of those kids, I understand that we point at coaching and stuff. I think it would be wrong to say that ISL kids haven't gotten better since going to ISL. Similarly, I think it would probably also be wrong to say that there aren't kids who are very good on this team that have been at ISL from the start. So, like Daniel Hassan is an example of that, I guess. But I think just cumulatively, and probably a bigger reason, apart from the ones that have already been touched on, like Imad said, that debating is just more accessible. You have more resources, and it's more standardized, so you can like get better at a faster and a more calculated rate. But I just think the circuit in of itself is just very strong right now. Probably the strongest it's ever been in schools. And there are a lot of good school kids who are very good at debates, which means that they're constantly exposed to a high level of competition domestically as well, which probably helps when they like transition to international competitions. And there are more kids domestically who, despite not even being on pod team, that are doing these international competitions as well, um, which is a good thing. So I think it's a mix of factors, but yeah, Hassan is definitely a contributing force.
So like this definitely does feel like, it's Pakistan's time now, like finally, and this may just be like the wailings of a heart already broken at the Cricket World Cup now looking for replacements. But like it really does feel that this is quite like a once in a generation talent that we've sort of like found in this year's Park team. But do you guys think this is a sustainable level of success that we've sort of like achieved now? Point being, like, do you guys think that the upcoming kids or kids who are even more junior than them are just as good? Do you see talent continuously keep springing up? I'll start with you on this one, Imad.
Yeah, I mean, who needs Bobsy the King when you have Kesar the feminist king, right? But I think it's hard to say. I think debating always and in general has ebbs and flows. And maybe this is a peak that is then inevitably followed by a trough. It's hard to say. But I do think that there is still reason for us to believe that this sort of success, or at the very least, this level of competitiveness is going to continue only because I'm seeing that perhaps younger students, the way that they're training nowadays, the way that they're perhaps participating in debate, is, I think, reflective of something that we talked about before also in a previous episode, where people just are more willing to accept that, yeah, we're just super invested in debates and we're going to sort of analyze debates, or debates ki theory ki bal ki khal nikalenge and all that kind of stuff. I can see some of that within these students as well, insofar as I've sort of seen them and locally. Um, and given, as long as there is, I think, a pool of people who are genuinely invested, I think coaching resources will be made available to them over time regularly. As long as there's a pool of students who can tap into those coaching resources, I think we're likely to see Pakistan offering, stiff competition to the international school circuit.
So Masood, given that there's a direct conflict for you here, where obviously once this Park team does extremely well at WSDC, your relevance will no longer remain. Are you really backing this team, or are you secretly sabotaging their efforts by giving them wrong feedback at tournaments?
You see, Yashar, I don't have to worry because I don't think this tournament is happening in Singapore, which means that it's not going to be aired on national TV, which means their reporting won't be as good as mine. So even if they win the entire tournament, it's not going to matter. I'm pretty confident in thinking that several park teams have already matched the level of quality that my park team showed. It's just, again, we were literally aired on really, really good TV, and that makes a big deal. Obviously, nobody's made it to a semifinal since, but as I was saying earlier with the whole power pairing thing and the increasing competitiveness of the school circuit, I don't think a semifinal in 2015 is a bigger deal than like a quarterfinal in the past 4 or 5 years. I think they're pretty equivalent. Possibly the quarterfinal edges it out in some of these years as well. So I don't mind if this Pak team wins. Like, we've already had a Pakistani team make it to the World Universities grand final, and people still watch my semifinal more, so I'm not too worried about this. I wanted to chip in on the earlier question as well. I think at least for 1 or 2 years, you're very likely to continue having extremely high quality park teams. Whether or not it's the exact same quality, that is like finalist, possible world championship threat, I don't know, just because that's anomalously good already. But I think at the very least, you'll have very very good park teams, if only because of like the system that is in place. Like you've got a reserve team, you usually have some sort of development squad. These people are all being coached by really really good coaches who are continuing to then like pass it down the line. I also do want to note, I think in terms of just record, Hassan is probably the undisputed goat coach locally. Like every team he's coached in about 10 years has at least been a semi-final final threat at the local level. I don't think if there's an exception. So I think you're likely to continue having very good teams for at least a couple of years. After that, what Imad has said holds true. Like debates has ebbs and flows. You can't really make a prediction past that point. But if things continue on their current trajectory, I can't see why they wouldn't stay excellent.
I like you bringing up that televised thing point because like I think discussed with a lot of UA over time that imagine if debate was more professionalized and it was like a sponsored team event and everything. So with all of that, there'd obviously be like touring parties, right? Like you'd go and watch your team perform at a tournament. So I was just wondering, like, matlab Nawaz, do you see a world where like sort of your entire buddies just like travel with the team to WSDC and abbas like kamre ja ke you just watch like matches and you cheer for your team and whatnot. Like, do you think the professionalization of debates could help us travel with the team one day?
I don't know, man. I don't know why you asked me this. I don't have these fantasies. I'm quite content watching these debates on my laptop. मतलब सही है, easy scene है. मेरे हिसाब से तो हर एक स्पोर्ट को भी इतना प्रोफेशनलाइज नहीं होना चाहिए. सही है.
Wrong side of history. But with that, we will give our best to Park team and the coaches and the judges traveling with the contingent this year. We'll be cheering you on, and Nawaz will be watching you online, and I'll be trying to catch a flight to wherever you guys are. With that, we'll move on from the school circuit to a recap of the university circuit that has just ended in Lahore and Punjab and Pakistan generally. Um, so we've had like the last tournament of the season, I think, with the invitational happen before the long summer break for both unis and schools. And so what I wanted to do was like have a quick recap of the season that's gone by, and rather than just leave it open ended to you guys to delve into whatever you want, I've come up with more specific questions this time to sort of get like your takes in and all of these. So we'll start with you, Nawaz, this time around. So one of the questions what I wanted to ask was the best tournament that you participated in, either as judge or as speaker, in terms of motion quality. So which tournament do you think throughout or yeah on average just had the best motions this year?
जुरासिक पार्क में कहूँ तो फिर तो काफी नार्सिसिस्टिक लगेगा. आगे तो मेरे थे. But let me see. हम साइवी का तब भी काफी नार्सिसिस्टिक लगेगा. सही बोलूं तो. You know what, man? Sophia was pretty good motion-wise, I would say. Part one, I like
Has
part
to be
one.
local tournament. I think has to be local.
Locally wise, locally, yeah, I would say Lums Ivy. Lums Ivy.
चलो मतलब भाई था वहाँ सी आई कैन सी इट आई कैन सी इट. मैं और इमाद की पार्टनरशिप मतलब अभी तक तो काफी फिट जा रही है. विल पास इट ऑन टू यू मसूद, योर फेवरेट मोशंस दिस ईयर.
Actually, I have the exact same answer as Navaz. I think the Lums Ivy had the best local motions this season. Slight segue into online. I think Philippine Debate Open had really banger motions, and it's a pity no other Pakistanis were there. But Lums Ivy, I think easily, yeah. I like the one about Atlantis, and then I like the one where Taha Masood got to run Communist India for a moment. I thought it was a fun tournament. Mazadar motion the. I got to cosplay as Nawaz Sharif in the final.
So basically, Imad और मेरी partnership मतलब is just unbeatable. Like we go to Jurassic Park, we win the thing. We go to like Lamsai, we emotions अच्छे
Let's
set
be
कर
honest for
लेते
a second. If Imad's on the motions committee, I don't think partnership हो रही थी. I think Imad के motions ज़्यादातर जा रहे हैं.
Like I remember एक मोशन था जिसमें हमने कहा थोड़ी डेप्थ नहीं थी और इमाद कहते हैं हाँ वो अशर ने सजेस्ट किया था. Like,
इमाद मनर बैकस्टैप करने पे लगा हुआ है लास्ट डे. अब इमाद विल गो टू यू एंड विल आस्क तुम्हें कौन सा टूर्नामेंट सबसे अच्छा लगा था?
I mean, I do think apart from all the praise for the Lums Ivy, I did think the Park Debate Forum Invitational had some good motions. I want to give a shout out to some motions in particular. I want to give a mention to the feminist movement advocating for anti-natalism. I think that was great. It left us a lot of room to debate very interesting things. Admittedly, Asher and I did not debate very sensible things, but that's separate. I also want to give a shout out to Ramadan Debates Open. This House supports nationalism. It actually was a dream of mine to debate This House supports nationalism, and I told Zed at that point, I said, Zed, we have two options. Either we can prep or we can watch the WUDC 2012 De La Salle final. And then obviously that was a joke. So then we had to come up with our own case. But it was a very fun PM speech to give on This House supports nationalism. I don't know why we don't do more. More motions like that. So yeah, even the one on revenge, I think Park Debate Forum Invitational Final discussing revenge, I think gave us a lot of. I think the debate was great, and I think the debate was pretty high quality. It also gave us some very interesting ideas and interesting information about what people think, how some teams, especially in the debate, thought revenge can be used, and by whom it can be used. So shout out to all of these tournaments. Very very
Shout
fun.
out to me, technically. Two of those motions are mine.
That's very true. That's very true. I suppose
The meme of Lumps Ivy and Invitational CS giving it to each other every other tournament are never going away. But I like
never
you
beat India.
mentioned specific motions, UK. Like I think I'll actually ask the Masood and Nawaz too. But before that, like my answer for favorite motion actually this season was the average debater quitting debates before their senior year back at the LSE Open. Too. So thank you to whoever kept that one. And I think the other favorite like motion I've had this year debating despite like the eventual shame and humiliation I took, was the Shajivna final about like striving to maximize life experiences in the pursuit of like a long life or whatever. Something along the lines of living afraid to maximize your life or going adventurous and living short and fast. I thought that was pretty fun despite the L and force that Masood and I ended up taking. But Nawaz and Masood, quick shouts for your favorite motions this season if you had any.
Atlantis.
Which one
Um,
was this?
This was Lum's IV round two. Something info slide about you. You're some scientist who just discovered Atlantis, and it's this house as a scientist would not reveal the discovery.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
we won that round, and it was a relatively easy room because only round two into the tournament. But like I just thought the motion was very cool, and I wish we'd been in like a top room while having it.
yeah. Solid shout.
Clearly, Masood and I should be on a motions committee together one day. It's just like you said,
uh,
never beating the allegations. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, Nawaz.
well, the ordeal final was pretty good. The one on this house hopes that the colony does not form an organized religion. Was a good motion.
What
This is the one
tournament
where
was
you've like
this?
found a new planet, and then there's something about whether or not
Yeah, yeah.
that a human
There was an
colony on the
info
new
slide
planet
in
finds a
which
new religion. This
yeah,
was
there
the
was a
Ramzan debate open RDO.
Uh is it generally the same debate as the Atlantis one?
No,
no.
no.
The Atlantis one is about whether or not you'd reveal the existence of the Atlantis civilization. This one was about whether or not you want the human colony on a new planet to develop organized religion.
Very fun. Very fun. I missed the Ramzan debate. Nay, I did speak the Ramzan debate open. I missed this round because I did not make it as far as this round. But we will quickly move on from that to our next question. What was the highest quality in terms of competitiveness tournament that you attended this year? It could be as a speaker, and again, it could be as a judge, and you were just judging very good matches throughout, something along those lines. We'll start off with you, Masood, this time.
So as a speaker, I think it's probably the LSE Open,
Hmm.
because I think the concentration of top level talent there was very high. Unfortunately, this is actually because of the fact that LSE पे बहुत ज़्यादा लोग नहीं आए थे, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But yeah, I mean, every round you were basically in trouble because you were running into some top speaker who could easily take a point off you. Even if you took a second or a third, you'd be worried the next round कि कोई आके point ले लेगा. Thankfully, Saram and I did pretty well, but it was a scary tournament. As a judge, I think the recent what we are calling the Jurassic Park IV or the Park Debate Forum Invitational, which I just think makes sense. Like we tried our hardest to get a lot of top teams, and we did. So it was pretty good.
All right. All right. Nawaz, similar for you?
We're staying local, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're still saying local.
I would say Lumps IV because I mean, I was at the LSE thing as well, but I did feel that Lumps IV felt more competitive, partially because me and Taha were underperforming in prelims, and also I think the semi-final match that we were in was probably the hardest or most stacked room I've been in locally at any tournament this year. Like the one in which me, Taha, I think you were judging this one, right? Like They had
Yeah.
Salim, Hanfia, Farrell, Bhakti, and then Jazim and Bud. I think that was probably the
Yeah.
most stacked room I've been in, and that was a semi. So,
Makes sense. Strong shout for probably the most stacked debate room we've had this season. Is it this or the Jurassic Park final? I think one of the two surely was the most competitive, at least on pure CV value rounds that's happened this season, right?
Fairly likely. I'm not sure how they'd weigh up, but yeah, it's
The
probably one of
Jurassic Park
these.
final being me, Imad, Sarim Laiba, Anam, Eza, and Jazim and Butt again. I lean towards the Lam Saivi semi actually. Fair enough.
You could
All right.
also theoretically have like a round four top room somewhere which beats all of these because those
yeah,
usually
yeah,
end up being more
maybe.
stacked.
Makes sense. Imad, a different answer for you or one of these?
Yeah, I mean, one of these only. I think as a speaker, definitely ran into some stiff competition at Park Debate Forum. They were obviously doing a round robin and they weren't doing power pairing, which meant that you perhaps weren't seeing the best teams again and again, which was perhaps the case at LSC, although I was judging LSC. But it was still extremely fun to judge LSC, especially some of those top rooms. Even at round three, round four, I thought that this was, pretty solid round, pretty solid room, etc. I think obviously that's sort of the local discussion, but competitively, Dilliman was probably the most competitive internationally, only by virtue of its break size. Um, Given that break size was pretty small to the number of teams, but yeah, I mean that's the local discussion for me as well.
Yeah, these international tournaments have been absolutely killer. Like I think Diliman was you lose one round, you're not breaking. The Uhuru that's happened right now is something like you need three firsts or four firsts to get through. International tournaments, especially ones that aren't destroying your wallet, I think are just getting more and more competitive. We'll move on to one category that's close to my heart, which is on best judge, because I think the circuit's judging has been the biggest improvement from my last time here to my this time here. So any judges that stood out to you or a particular like OA that just really stood out to you this season? We'll start off with you, Imad, this time.
Again, locally, I'll have to think about it a little bit. I think internationally, we got judged by Luigi Alcanesis at Diliman. So I thought that was quite a excellent OA, and I thought generally, obviously, given that it's Luigi and sort of his record, sort of reflected that that was probably the best judging I got during the during the international season. Locally, I mean, I've really only spoken Shajivna and then the Park Debate Forum. And obviously, I got judged by Masood a couple of times at the Park Debate Forum. As offended as I was by his oral education about how I and Usher skipped intuition in the the anti-natalism round, it was still a pretty good OA. We did get judged by Ruth, but those were the Shajivna out rounds, so there wasn't much of an OA. Uh, so therefore, we didn't really sort of get a very clear indication. But yeah, I mean, we had a mix of judging. I think throughout, given that I only spoke two tournaments, I think the judges I saw were sort of kind of being pretty rotated. Like got judged by Hamza Javed a few times in both Park Debate Forum and then once in Shajivna, etc. So yeah.
All right, all right. Masood, you have a shout.
Yeah, I think for me, actually combining both the domestic and international OAs I've received this year, Ali Hanfia and like round two of Shajivna is the best one, actually, straight up. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think Hanfia's OA round two Shajivna was phenomenal. I didn't expect it because I've been judged by Hanfia before. At some point, he was good, but he was never like this good. So I think this was just effortlessly the best one I've had, and I was also in like the Luigi away. I've had a few other very big international names judge me. I just thought this was the most incisive, clear, well explained OA out there. I want to give a shout out to my second favorite judge this season, who was Shah Jahan, who judged me a couple of times at Shajina and the Lums Ivy. I'm very confused whenever I see the memes about Shah Jahan being a bad judge because that's just not my experience at all. And I'm not saying this. I'm saying this as somebody who keeps getting first from Shah Jahan. Like I got a second, nearly a third from Shah Jahan in one round against teams who you would not expect it of. And I've gotten a couple of firsts, yes, but like I think Shah Jahan is really, really good. And if it wasn't for Ali Hanfia, he'd be my favorite local judge at present.
All right, Nawaz.
Well, same answers as the. I think Hanfia and Shahjahan are very good. Also, don't get the flack that Shahjahan receives. I think another person that's very good that I've received OA from is Imad from the local circuit. I think Imad
That
is
was a
very
good
good
answer.
judge. I think those are the top three.
Yeah, my answer was going to be Imad. I got it judged by Imad a couple of times. And minus the final of the LSE, where he obviously gives the wrong decision against me, like he usually gets it quite right. All right. So, given we've done all three of these, like we've looked at all three aspects of these, do you guys then just have like a quick answer of like your favorite tournament of the season? Like I'll start. Mine was the Lumps IV this year. I thought it was super fun. So many people had returned to the circuit. Big tournament, high quality, fun motions. So for me, like eventually Lumps IV just stops it all. But do you guys have a quick answer for yours?
Yeah, for me, from both a debating and a just tournament experience point of view, it's the LSE Open. That's the one where I think the debates were the most fun, where the socializing with random people was the most fun. Everything was just excellent there. Loved it.
For me, the Jurassic Park IV that we just did, I mean, again, obviously, I feel like when you speak a tournament, you enjoy it more than when you judge a tournament. And again, it was a very sort of social thing, a great final, lots of hanging out after the tournament as well, which I thought was great. So, yeah, I think that was like super fun for me.
I mean, I'm gonna give a off-brand answer. Like mine was Casey. Like I was just there with the Psychus boys. I know you guys weren't there, but like Shinawa and Hadi took good care of me and Taran. We were didn't really go in thinking much. We did some fun stuff outside of the dates, so it was just a good trip, you know. Um,
I like it. The four of us have like four different answers, which is like I think a rare event on this show generally. But like shout out to like the many tournaments that have restarted or resumed like this season around. There's been a lot of like returns, notably LSE. And I think it's what's brought about like this rejuvenation of old debaters and high quality matches coming again because people want to do more debates. So shout out to all of these orgcoms doing all of the Khwari, and this is a request to others who aren't doing it right now. Please do so. Like summer vacations are here, a lot of us don't have anything else to do. We're waiting to spend our weekends at your tournaments. But all right, fun answer. We'll now move on to our favorite partners this season. Ali Nawaz, who is your favorite partner and why is it Ashar Imran?
Actually, it's very fun. Yeah, as a partner, yeah, you know, it was a good ride. No, I think it would be like blasphemy if I say anything other than Sarim, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Sarim and me had a couple of good tournaments. I think we gelled well. It was nice after because there was a big gap after school that we kind of adapted well together pretty fast. I think on our day, like if we're in sync, I'm very confident that me and Sarim can beat almost anyone. So I have to say so.
Hit है या miss है? Taha Masood.
In typical debater fashion, I have three answers. I think my favorite person to speak with, just in terms of the fun I had with the partner, is actually you, Usher. So the season opener still remains my most fun partnership to date.
बस
But
एक ही
I
आंसर.
don't think it was a very good partnership. My the person I think I performed the best with in terms of like just how I think we complemented each other was Sarim. When I spoke with him a couple of times, once at the LSE Open and once at the Philippine Debate Open. But the person who objectively I actually have the most success with is Navas because we won a tournament and I haven't done that with anybody else this season. So there's my three answers.
So I was here for one of them, and then I don't know what you were mumbling on there. But yeah, Imad,
But see, now that Masuda said Usher, I don't have to feel guilty about not saying Usher. Although, definitely big shout out to Usher Imran. I will actually say that I had a lot of fun with Anam and Daniel Makbul at the Alfaz Open. This was an online tournament that we spoke. I think that Anam and Daniel and we actually make just a very good team because I think we complement each other's sort of weaknesses and drawbacks, and then also are able to, I think, compound on our strengths. And it was also a lot of fun. Like we were playing like random games in the middle. It was like early morning for me, late night for them, and we were just having a lot of fun catching up as well. Since those guys are at the time were sort of still, in the states and everything. So yeah, big shout out to those two. It was a lot of fun. We did get unfortunately a bit mistreated in the judgment of the semi-final because I thought we spoke quite well. I was going second in reply, and it was a lot of fun knowing that I have a great first speaker who can deliver content, and also like a great third speaker who can summarize the debate in such a way that's just like also very fun to listen to as a teammate. So yeah, good on Anam and Daniel.
between you, Anam Nasir, and Daniel Makbul, who eventually went first? Because these are
Anam,
three.
Anna was going first, I was going second, Daniel was going third, which I thought was like the best combo for the three of us. Like Daniel whips in such a piara way, like he's able to talk down to the other team in such a way that they don't even realize they're being talked down to. Uh, and as a second, I had a lot of fun as well. Like I remember asking you a little bit about how does one do second, in the 3v3, because I haven't done it. But yeah, it was fun.
Dang,
I think
battle.
your best lineup would have been all three of you at first, personally, but that's just my opinion.
Crazy
What's your
case.
what's your answer, Rashid?
Yeah, I spoke this year with Masood, Nawaz, Imad, is it Bakhtiyar? I think those are my four partners, right? Yeah, so my I think favorite partner was SN Mohammed this year. The second half of the infamous debate group called The People. For those of you who don't know, the streets do. So ask the streets. But nah, my serious answer is I think my favorite debate partner this year was probably like Imad at the Jurassic Park Wala tournament. Like I think Imad and I like complement each other the most in terms of our speaking, like in terms of what the other is missing. And I did want to segue into like what makes someone a good partner for you, and I'll sort of like start the discussion on this here. But like I think with Imad and I, we look at debating and like a lot of analysis etc very differently. So with Imad and I think it's very often a recognition that the other is able to do something that I am not, and thus like I feel very comfortable that the things that I will mess up potentially, Imad is the strongest on and so will always cover. And I think it's vice versa, similar for Imad, where some of the things that he's not as good as, I usually tend to do well in. So I think with that complementing each other, like I'm always at my most comfort because I feel both that I'm doing like a very good job and like मैं अपने partner को जिता रहा हूँ, but also I feel like the things that I worry about the most often during a debate tournament I no longer have to worry about. So I think that's why it's a math for me. So like quick lines on like what makes a good partner for you guys. Like we'll start with you, Nawaz.
Um, I don't think I really understand what makes a good partner for me. I think I can comment what works with me and Sarim.
Sure.
I think what works with me and Sarim is mostly that his ability to just phrase things that I say in a very rambly, because I'm very rambly in prep in terms of ideas. I don't construct arguments. I mainly just have a bunch of ideas. So it's useful to have somebody who can just group all of that into like a very structured and nice way. Um, I think it could be anything. Like I think it's useful to have somebody who like thinks like you. But I've also had partners who don't think like me, and there are some debates in which Saram and I don't think alike at all. And I think that also comes in handy because it makes your case wider and like it opens your eyes to like other points of attacks and stuff. So I think every team is different, and you just have to find like different things that can enhance your you know setup.
All right. Imad, Masood, you guys have like comments here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ashar, what you said is probably the most important thing. Like both partners should be able to fill in the gaps that the other partner leaves out in terms of skills and abilities, etc. I think that's just straight up the most important thing. And I consider myself pretty partner dependent in the sense that how much my teammate and I are sort of on the same page about certain things, or at the very least are good in just in terms of chemistry, affects the extent to which I debate the quality of my speeches quite a bit. And I think here's it's interesting because it's okay for I think two teammates for two partners to sort of think very differently about debates, but if they have good communication or are able to understand the way the other person communicates to them, or understand the way the other person thinks about the debate, they'll be able to bridge that gap. I obviously don't think that there should be such a strong divergence in how debating is sort of conceived by both people, because I think then the communication becomes difficult. But as long as I think you're able to intuitively over time understand how it is that your teammate is approaching the case, what it is that they're thinking about, what it is that they will inevitably perhaps miss out during prep, etc., that you can jump in and fill in, or vice versa. Is I think so. I think it's very difficult to just come into one tournament and be like, okay, we're a great team. I usually think it takes time, but you can see the potential very early on within you and like a potential partner. So yeah.
Interesting. Masood.
I think all good partners have one personality trait in common. which is that they're first speakers. Uske alawa, I think most things I'm pretty good managing. Jokes aside, I think there's only a couple of things I really want from partners. One, I want them to be relatively well informed, because I think the one thing that sinks me more than anything else inside debates is like a topic I don't know, then I'm just fourth. And the second is like I want them to have this like rather delicate balance between being too assertive and too needy in prep. So I can't really stand either side very much. So when somebody tries to dominate prep, that irritates me. But when somebody needs me to like sit down and walk them through everything, that irritates me. So I like relatively independent but cooperative partners who know a fair bit of stuff. Everything besides that is just like icing on top. And obviously, I like first speakers. First speakers are great.
Yeah, hard to relate on first speaker. If there's someone willing to go OG and OPM and LO, you are a great partner. All right, this brings me to my second last question of this run. Story of the season. So this is basically your favorite story of the season. It could be anything. It could be tournament's long narrative or a singular moment. I will start us off because I have a favorite moment imprinted into my mind, and that is the existence of Hassan Butt's POIs for the entirety of the season. Because I think the one thing that I loved more than anything was Hassan Butt asking POIs to people at tournaments and then standing up, laughing at them, or displaying shock and exclamation at their responses. So my favorite story happens at the Jurassic Park final, where Hassan Butt asks a POI from CO Whip. CO Whip gives a reasonable enough response. And Hassan Butt stands up, puts his hand on his head, first cries in shock and anger, and then laughs at the possibility of what Elo Whip is saying, and then looks at the judges to make sure everyone else is also on the same page, that this is both very funny and shocking happening at the same time. The pain and enjoyment simultaneously existing in Butt's eyes is my favorite story of the season. Taha Masood, what have you enjoyed?
Uh, I have two answers. I'm sorry. The first one I think is very much a contender for goat moment. It just happened so long ago. Okay, I think it's slipping a bit from people's minds. Lekin, it was a big deal when Daud Khadal came on the Shajivna final and said, "Vote for the real best whip in Pakistan." That's that's a real fire moment, and I don't want to forget that one. But yes, unfortunately, recency bias also takes over, and I also have a favorite moment from the Jurassic Park IV final, which is just extremely quick summary to make sense of this. The debate is about whether or not revenge is a good thing. And Sarim and Laiba, who are in opening opposition, have run a whole case about how revenge is really important for like colonized people and oppressed people to be able to fight back and stuff. And then Imad comes up at closing government extension and poignantly points out to opening opposition that bad people also take revenge. And like the moment of shock which seems to pass through the room at that moment, where Sarim and Laiba are just sort of considering the possibility that revenge goes two ways, was a killer for me. So I really, really like that moment.
Nawaz.
I think another moment that's kind of being forgotten is again the Hassan Butt with people dying from malaria from that Lums IV I think matchup. I think that was pretty funny.
You will have to narrate the story, Nawaz, for our audience.
Um, so I don't remember. I think the exact debate was this house would prefer economic reparations over political reparations, and I think our side, basically me and Dar were OG, and Bud and Joseph were our closing, were on the side of economic reparations, and OO, which was I'm forgetting, but I think it was MBA and it was I think AZ. Um, they basically were talking about how nobody cares about like another hospital within like a village or something like that. They're very marginal benefits or something like that. And Hassan Butt comes up in his speech and like very charismatically he goes, "Well, I think the people that are dying of malaria would disagree with your characterization." And he just had to pull the entire the entirety of that auditorium in stitches. Everybody was laughing. It's very funny, especially
Right.
the way that he delivers. Um, yeah, that was pretty funny.
Maddie Roy.
Uh, that just reminded me of a great story. The fact that we were Maddie Roy and Ashi Roy, and that we came out to the Roman Reigns theme at the Jurassic Park IV. I think I'm never going to be able to live that down. Um, but yeah, I think too. I'll also give like a couple of answers. I think first, big shout out to Lums for reaching the semis of UADC. I think we saw it a lot on like the Drums Insta and Drums Facebook as well. I definitely think that was a bit of an underdog run. I mean, obviously, all three very good speakers, but not a lot of experience necessarily on the international stage. So that was really great to see. But I think the story might just be the fact that my reputation as an authoritarian and as a tyrant, which to be quite frank, was already solidified last year, although you guys weren't here to witness it, when I was seeing throughout the year of 2023. I think that reputation has been further solidified. I think that reputation is unjust. I back up all of the claims I make about what is a good motion or what is a good, debate, etc., etc. I just think that people just can't handle the smoke, so they resort to unfair labeling and these unfair these ad hominems about me and my proclivity towards democratic tradition. So I think that's something I think is going to remain fresh in my head as well.
Everyone disagrees with me. They must all be
Everyone,
wrong.
are we the baddies?
um, no, no, Matt, I totally cannot see you in a dictatorial and authoritarian position, especially after one of the first remarks you ever made in front of me, or the first remarks I ever heard you made was कि लम्स के first year students को M7 के आगे उल्टा लटका देना चाहिए as a form of civilizing them as people.
It's the
That
context.
guy could not ever turn out to be dictator. But nahi, fun stories. There's one that I just want to give a shout out to that I thought कोई और बोल देगा इसलिए मैंने अपनी वाली बता दी. But I think one of the greatest stories of this season is the amount of returns that we've had. We've already done an episode on this, but to add to the long list of married people that have made a return to debate, we now also have Abrar Bhai returning at the recent tournament. So I think that increases the list of dinos to 78 now in the circuit. I'm obviously keeping track, and all of these are real people, and there's a lot more people like me at these tournaments.
And that's not our average age.
For anybody
Yeah.
who doesn't know, Abrar Ahmed Bhatt was like speaking in like the 2015-16 university period all the way till like 2018. Same era as me, but a little bit older. So another old legend of the circuit that are back.
I'm
He was in the post, like the end of his debating time in Pakistan when I was in my freshman year. So great times.
I'm telling you, we're a few years too late, but now a lot of the people tournaments are named after वो भी वापस आ रहे होते हैं अभी. But we'll move on to this to our final category and the most important one for the season, which is your favorite meme of the season, debate related, of course. There's a lot of channels out there. Thank you for keeping debates entertaining and interesting. But I think all of us have signaled out like our favorite memes. I'm going to try and show them to you on the screen, Pele. And if tech and our minds fail, then we'll just narrate them out to you. We'll start off with Nawaz for this one, if you have one out already.
I don't think I have it out. I know which meme though. Uh, so it's from that Lums IV semifinal, because as Tah's already referred to, he kind of wanted to make China a communist state. So the funny bit over here is that in prep, I was a bit like confused because I was like, counterfactual kya hoga? Like obviously Congress, right? I was like, nahi nahi, Congress to nahi hogi. I'm like, kya hoga phir? He's like, it's gonna be the party from Kerala, the socialist guys. I'm like, Kerala, like I was like, okay, it's Tom Masood. If he says it's gonna be them, it's gonna be them. So then I go home and I see this meme and I'm gonna try to find it because the PDM guys they just like find the best picture of Thomas that they can possibly find. Um, and the meme essentially is communist China and it's a picture of Mao, and then it's communist India and there's a picture of Thomas Wood. Again, I'm trying to find it, but the picture of Thomas Wood that they picked is probably the most iconic picture I've ever seen.
This
I
is a
remember
screen
this
cap from
meme.
Sophia Part
Yeah,
1.
yeah, like wide eyes, hair flying.
Like
Uh,
it's a man
Absolutely
who's
wonderful
passionate
moment.
to start a revolution. I think that's probably what Lenin looked like when he was like starting up his revolution in Russia. But like yeah, if anybody can look it up, find it. I can't find it at the moment, but
While Nawaz tries to locate it, we'll go on to you, Masood.
I just want to start by reminding us we did get through that round, so Communist India worked. Uh, My favorite meme is also about me because I am a narcissist. I want to quickly check if you guys can see it. If not, I will read it out. Just, is this remotely visible to you guys?
Only the
No,
heading.
yeah, that now I started. Yeah, I see the pictures of Mr. McMahon going.
But you'll have to read
Oh,
it out, I think.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the headline is Taha Masood's weakness, and then it goes number one, good arguments, opening government, and 18-year-old whip speakers. And the context is at this point I've dropped rounds to Dawood Khalil, Bilal Najaf, and Hassan Butt. So clearly I have an issue, and I thought it was very timely when it came out.
Very nice, very nice. Imad.
So once again, I thought that the Jurassic Park final was great and that all of the speakers gave very good speeches. But I did think that I don't know if this one is necessarily going to be visible.
थोड़ा थोड़ा ऊपर
Uh,
करके करीब लाओ. It is visible. Oh yeah, it is visible.
and I thought that this was hilarious. Shout out to PDM and the genius conniving minds behind it. No disrespect to anyone involved. It was, like I said, great. But this particular brand of humor, I think, when applied to debates, really sort of hits home. It really takes off, you know. So great. This was, I think, my fantastic, favorite meme of the season.
My shout out also to PDM for coming up with this meme. If it's clear, essentially the context is
Center it. It's not centered. I think it's your right.
To your left. To your left.
Oh, to your left. Sorry.
to my
Yeah.
left.
No,
Too much.
too much. There
Now
we
it's
go, there we go.
perfect.
Stop. Yeah, the story behind this one, since I don't
Yeah.
know, Ashir can narrate it right now,
Yeah.
is that Sarim and Laiba went into a room in the Jurassic Park IV where they were meant to have two swings. And obviously, when you have swings in your room, you usually assume you're going to have an easy time. But I figured two swings, that's not fair. They can't have two free wins over here. Like, that's too many free points. So I thought, okay, we'll send one swing, which is a normal swing, and then I'll go swing the other position. And then I won. So that was a bit unfortunate for them.
I don't know, man. Like, if I was getting ready for like a swing speaker at a 15-team tournament, and the swing speaker happened to be Taha Khan Masood, I would not be very happy. But thank you to PDM and all of the debate spice you keep generating. I hope you guys keep making memes that get people angry. क्योंकि फिर बहुत मजा आता है comments में.
None of
And
us are
this
safe.
and
Tier
this
list episode when?
and this moves us to the final section of this podcast, which is going to be a slightly broader discussion on the toxicity that surrounds debate. Are debates toxic? Are debaters toxic? We've obviously heard this one before. We've obviously gone through a lot of this era before. Me personally has spent a lot of time with debaters who I think could surely be qualified as toxic. But we want to have a broader discussion today on whether or not there's something inherent about the activity that makes people who do it for a long time turn out to be annoying or toxic or dangerous or whatever is the term you want to fit here. If it's not just about the activity itself, is it about the way the activity happens in Pakistan specifically, in our circuit? So just a deep dive into the stereotypes regarding toxicity in debaters, and a couple of and our thoughts on this. I'll start off with you, Imad, and I'll throw you like a starting point. I think the first thing we can do is like sort of define what the stereotype is. So generally, obviously, it's easy enough to say debaters are toxic and or are perceived as toxic. But more specifically, are there terms that come to mind? So one of the things that I've often heard is sort of like treating all normal conversations like they're a debate, and so trying to win every conversation through manipulation or argumentation or whatever is the fact. Are there any other sort of like specific stereotypes that come to your mind?
Yeah, I think those are broadly the stereotypes. I think there's also this air of condensation, which is like, oh, the debater person will act as if they always know more, or they will at the very least pretend to always know more. And that secondly, they might always act in such a way that they seem to focus on a utilitarian perspective in every conversation and like in every relationship where they're like, oh, they're going to look out for their own best interest because that is for some reason, or either they're able to sort of logic their way into justifying any sort of bad thing that they end up doing. My take on the whole debate is that I don't think there's anything inherent about debating or about debaters that make them more toxic. I think people are toxic regardless of what activity they engage in. I think there are only two real differences that make people think debaters are more toxic. I think the first thing is that debating is also a prominent activity in high school. And in high school, you tend to be a slightly immature person who may be like mean to people, who might be, a bit of a bully or who might be arrogant, etc. I think once again, the mean girl, mean boy, bully stereotype is not one that's confined to debating at all. I think that's where the second sort of issue comes in, which is I think that debaters are only somewhat better at vocalizing their opinions in a particular fashion, which makes other people, especially those, and to be quite honest, I think in general, when it comes to discussing actual issues about life, like, okay, if I'm like having a discussion about a serious topic with someone, oftentimes I think those discussions don't really go well. And only in instances where there's, let's say, someone is a debater, they're able to vocalize their opinions in a particular way that makes other people think they're toxic. But I think that toxicity, like I said, agree happens everywhere. I think like from crypto bros to like sports people to people who, gym freaks, even like people who are immersed in video gaming, in every single thing that you could possibly think of, you will genuinely find people who are unpleasant to be around because that's just who they are. And I think like debating at its worst will just give you a mechanism by which you can vocalize your opinions and your ideas in a particular way and perhaps vocalize them more, especially because debating is fundamentally an activity about talking. But I think that other activities are sort of yield just as much toxicity. And I don't, and I think, debating is sort of unfairly assailed in this manner quite a bit.
So I'm willing to accept that like all activities have toxic people or like have annoying personalities within them, and that's simply a factor of age and other things. But the hate against debate does seem to exist much more prominently than it does for other activities. And I'm just wondering that like if it is true that all kids this age happen to be annoying, what is it that makes debaters so popularly considered annoying? We'll throw this one to you, Masood, and then perhaps like either of you, Nawaz or Imad, can like butt in and add on.
Yeah, I think that debaters actually do have unique mechanisms by which they become a bit more toxic. I don't think it's necessary that everybody who debates becomes toxic, but I think there are very much mechanisms inside debate as an activity which make it likelier than not that you can become a toxic person. That said, I do think debaters catch a disproportionate amount of flack for their toxicity relative to other groups. But on why debaters are likely to become toxic, firstly, I think there's one thing missing in our characterization of the toxic debater. It's a guy. It's debater bros specifically who are accused of being toxic. I have never once heard an accusation about like a woman being toxic because she is a debater. At worst, I've heard that a woman is toxic in and of herself and she happens to be a debater. It's not causally linked the way it has a tendency to be when you're talking about debate bros. And I think there's a couple of reasons debate bros might end up being toxic. Belly butt, I think competitive activities specifically breed toxicity, but that's the generic one. The more important one here, I think, is debates is a very performative activity. So it's one where you get a lot of validation for like how you are and how you display yourself as a person. Like at the end of a round, you're like, I sound really smart right now, and I gave a really good speech. You think a lot of yourself when you win a lot of debates. It's actually a fairly intoxicating feeling, and it's not difficult to see why people with poor self-restraint or just any amount of internal reflection would let that go to their head and start thinking they're really, really big shit. Couple this with what Imad has suggested, which is that these are typically people from high school, early college, who are very likely to let that sort of stuff go to their head, and it's a big deal. This toxicity is often worse than you, not worse, but it's often more visible than you might find in other sorts of competitive activities like sports and stuff, because this is toxicity which also revolves around the idea that you're smarter than other people, which means you are likelier to try to invalidate their opinions, you are likelier to pick fights with them on random things. And it's really critical to note here debaters are generalists, right? But there's not a specific topic area we know a lot about. We are expected to go in and just talk a lot of crap about a bunch of things we know nothing about. This means debaters feel very equipped to go and give their opinions on things they do not have rightfully the space to give opinions on, and give it with the exact same confidence they give an 8-minute speech with, which is really, really grating when it comes to regular conversation. That all said, I think these are all extremely avoidable forms of toxicity, and over time, people in the circuit have done a much better job avoiding it. I think debaters today are considerably less toxic than debaters 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so on and so forth. As to why I think debaters catch disproportionate flack, though, I think the reason that debaters get a lot more hate for their stuff than like sports kids and other types of like toxic competitive people is because toxic is a term you only use in liberal and left crowds. You don't use it anywhere outside of that. Debaters primarily are like one of the major activities you're going to see inside liberal and left crowds. So they just disproportionately draw that ire because, like, competitive sporting is not as big as competitive debating in these circles, for instance. So unfortunately, this means debaters get a much worse rep than I think other very, very toxic communities as well. That's my take.
Very, very fun point, UK. I think to add on to the competitiveness thing, debate, unlike other sort of like sports activities or gyms or like any other ECS, sort of rank you very, very directly. Like even in sports, sure, there is winning and losing, but I think the extent to which in debate you get marked as someone better than like your peers, teammates, slash other like people from other schools sort of competing in your activity consistently builds in young ages. It sort of builds a I am better than my peers sort of mentality around you, and I think that does translate back into your outside of debate friendships as well. I think for like high school or young kids generally, being told that their thinking or the way they look at the world or the way their ideas emerge are just so much better than their peers are on average, I think sort of makes kids feel like you said that their opinions are worth much more than they should be, and that sort of brings about entitlement and also sort of like this desire to push around your opinions because you think they're worth more. So strong agree on that. I don't think Imal, I think you want to add something before I push on a new question.
No, I think it was just before Nawaz gives his 2 cents. I think the another reason perhaps why we get, like Masood said, disproportionate flack. Apart from what Masood said, which I do agree with, I think it's also debaters are a lot more in front of you when they're engaged in their activity, only to suggest that sports people or like people from other communities might be engaging in their activities or communities in a way that's a little bit more secluded, as opposed to perhaps debaters who will still maintain non-debate social circles. I mean, they'll have a debate social circle, but will still perhaps maintain non-debate social circles. And I think also, secondly, that I just think to some degree, maybe because debating, like, it's like the cool thing to hate on debaters, because I think the notion of the debater being a nerdy person, a nerdy know-it-all, is still a very weird sort of reputational stereotype that's still associated with debating. Therefore, I think it just oftentimes is easier to criticize debaters as opposed to perhaps criticizing people who, let's say engage in sports or like engage in other activities, only because I think it's the ammunition is easier to get access to.
I'm confused by your first point. Are you suggesting
Yeah.
that like people from other competitive activities don't have social groups outside those competitive
No,
activities?
they do. I just feel as if the exposure that other people. I mean, I would argue that the potential exposure. I suppose I'm really just making my first point again initially, which was just that you can, if a debater is good at vocalizing their opinions, and they have opinions you disagree with, you are likelier to consider them toxic, as opposed to a sports person whose main sort of activity is not centered around opinions about issues, as it is much about, let's say, their physical strength or their ability to play, etc.
To add on to that, I do think debater is also quite contrarian. Like again, I think it's a factor of the activity. You get quite used to and quite comfortable disagreeing with people. So I think more than debaters exclusively having external social groups, debaters treat external social groups as if they are also debaters, something that mayhaps people from other activities aren't doing. And I don't think in general society, like you get to disagree with people as bluntly as you get to do in debates. I think the inability to separate those behaviors perhaps takes some action. Yeah, Masood, like
Actually, no, I just think that that's, I think, pretty emblematic of why people don't like debaters, is the actually approach that a lot of them take inside regular conversation.
Nawaz, I'd like to bring you in here because you also have sort of insights into another circuit. Is the debaters are toxic thing universal, or is this like a thing that's more prevalent in Pakistani debating culture?
Man, I'll be honest, like in terms of like the external person, like outside of debate, viewing debaters, I think they don't care. Like that's just been my personal experience. Like most people who I like interact with, be it school or be it university, and they'd be like, "Okay, are you going to debate camp?" They're like, "Okay, that's cool," or "That's something you're interested to." Either they don't like engage with it, or they engage with it to a certain extent, and then you move on. Like so I probably think that this idea that debaters are toxic is probably perpetuated mostly by the debate community itself, who probably wants to resolve this toxicity. Um,
I definitely disagree on that. Like non-debaters have unfollowed me on Twitter, stopped talking to me, stopped talking to several people I know because they know they're debaters. Like, it is very much a non-debater thing that debaters are toxic. Debaters don't internally hold this as much.
I don't know
Women
this
debaters
Twitter
do,
thing.
but that's
I
again
would
because like
definitely
we're
say at
paid for it.
university, like nobody definitely looked at like the debaters who are going at society as people who are necessarily toxic. Um, you could maybe like make a case for people who run for union positions or exec positions, but not necessarily the people who are involved within the training or the actual activity of like going to debates and like competing in debates. Not those people. So I never like encountered that in school or in university. I don't know what Todd's experience is in Twitter spaces. I just genuinely think that the mass majority of the world probably doesn't know what DP debating is or what like this whole idea of these people even is. I think there's definitely sometimes people and kids can get into camps that might have a culture of toxicity. So your coach might be like overly competitive or might like have like overly excessive expectations from you or might like sway you in a certain way. I think, or maybe you have partners who are like that, and maybe that culture is a bad culture that can manifest. But the thing about non-debaters, like having an opinion about debaters, I personally not experienced that. But
All right, that's actually interesting. Because I think I lean towards Masood ki take on this, which is that at least in my experience and in the local circuit or in local spaces, I'm sure the hate isn't as, I suppose, as explicit. Someone will just walk up to you and say, "You debater." But I do think that if you tell someone you're a debater, like the like the emotion they will feel is definitely negative as opposed to like positive. Like most people would rather be friends with someone who hadn't debated than had. And yeah, but at least that's been my experience with people, like where obviously it's not like people stop being friends with you once they know you debate, but there is like a fair bit of like jabbing and teasing and jousting around the fact that, oh matlab, lol debates, like I think this stereotype does keep traveling. Like I think for a long while, like if you were a guy who was into sport, like jocks had a reputation for just being dumb-witted, like abusive people. And I do think these stereotypes keep traveling, but but I do definitely feel is keep presence. So we've had some discussion on whether or not we think like this exists. I want to get back to that train and say that one of the other things that I think I've often seen debaters be accused of is what Imad mentions before, like this over rationalization or over logification of normal discussions. I think one of the things that debaters get a lot of like slack for is forgetting the fact that normal conversations aren't debates. And thus, like I think even in a lot of like the personal relationships you might form with your friends, yeah, but just simply like any conversation you start having with the people around you, you sort of develop a lens of debate, which is, okay, all right, how can I explain this, or how can I solve this, or what's like the easiest way to break this down into solutions. And I think that sort of like makes conversations boring, or at least like not as emotionally involved. Are any of these things ringing true to you guys? Do you guys experience or feel this with other debaters? What are thoughts? We'll give it to
Maybe
Masood. Yeah. Anyone start,
I
we'll give it to
think there
Masood.
is some truth to this. I think there's definitely, again, a claim to be made about over rationalization by debaters. But again, the reason I think that this one probably is not specific to the activity is because you don't hear this claim made about women debaters. This is, again, a very male debater thing, very specifically. So clearly, there's some interaction happening with debates there, but I don't think it is debates causing this because it wouldn't be gendered if it was. Like, women debaters would be accused of the exact same thing, and they're not. So I think this is likely a bunch of people who were already, let's use the word mansplaining, and just suddenly got a new spin on how to do it, which is particularly annoying because of how like the rationalizing, logicking version of mansplaining is even more condescending than its more pre-evolved version.
I think the last thing that I want to discuss on this topic is that, Imad, we do see like a lot of people in global culture, like who are quite annoying, end up being debaters in some format. So I'm talking about these Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro kind of like personalities, and obviously these aren't the only ones. Like you have a lot of right wing fanatics out there. You have people on the left, I'm sure, also who are quite annoying as this. And I'm not sure people on the left are as annoying as Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. But point being, like debaters have in the past and continue to produce extremely toxic slash annoying slash problematic people as they grow up. And like, while sure, other problematic people have come from other various backgrounds, do you think there's a sort of, if you get too involved in this culture of thinking you're smart and you figured everything out, do you think it becomes a big enough problem for you as you grow up for you to become this hyper intellectualizing problematic figure?
Well, I mean, I don't think Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, I don't think these people are debaters at all. I don't think they're debaters. They're pseudo intellectuals who operate in a garb of debate, but that's not actually debating, right? Um, the second thing then is, I think that yeah, that's perfectly true in the sense of if anyone thinks too highly of themselves too consistently over a period of time, will end up becoming a person who's difficult to be around. Once again, I argue that this is not exclusive to debates whatsoever. Like, again, whether they're someone who considers themselves super intellectual and think they're really smart regardless of whether they're a debater or not, and consistently thinks of themselves as such, is it necessarily going to end up over time being a person who's just like a nuisance to be around, right? So I think that just in terms of what Masood had said initially, I think, or rather just now, I do think that the debater approach, when actually done fairly within a conversation, I wouldn't say that anyone should make their relationships transactional or based on utilitarianism, whatever. But I would say that oftentimes conversations, especially on serious discussions, can be improved if people are willing to sort of engage in a way that debaters do. And I think like it's actually funny because Boso, the world's champion from 2016, has a few videos up on Big Think where he talks about something similar actually, where he suggests that if people are engaging with each other in a way that's actually fair and reasonable, that's actually meant to respond to the crux of the logic that the other person is presenting, an approach that is understanding of what a person's premise is. Because frankly, I've participated in lots of discussions that have been fundamentally circular, and they might not have been had people perhaps been a bit more aware that okay, this is how we start the discussion, this is how we start a particular conversation, and this is how we don't. So yeah, I think like plenty of conversations can benefit from a more debatery approach to it. But yeah, of course, that's not like a golden rule of thumb or anything.
I wish I could
I,
debate all the time too.
I just wanted
um
to chip in one quick last thing about why I think debaters might have a greater tendency towards toxicity in some ways. Debates, compared to most competitive activities, more privileged people started. Like, just you need to be better at English. You generally need to be in like a private school. Like, the type of person who goes into debates is likelier to be privileged, probably not very aware of it, and a bit more of a jackass to people around them. So I do think a part of the reason people dislike like debater kids again is because they're arrogant snobs, and as an arrogant snob speaking, I get it.
do you guys think there's like a fix? Like, I know I said last question, but this like quickly gets me to, because I think what more often than not is helpful is like humble checks. Like, I think every time a debater gets told, bro, you're not really itna smart, and like by another smart person, you get sort of like this sense of okay, of humbleness, and like of sort of accepting that there are situations where you're probably wrong, etc. as well. Do you think probably this is fixable by just having coaches or more senior people in the circuit offering these instances of like humbleness around every now and then? Like, do you think there is a fix? Do you think it has gotten better? Because I definitely do. I think it's gotten better over the last 3-4 years. And if you agree, what do you think has made it better? So just some final parting thoughts on this from anyone who wants to jump in first. All right,
I
yeah, fine, Masood. I'll take a name. We'll start Masood.
Yeah, I was saying, I think being criticized a lot for being toxic has caused debaters to become better about things and a little bit more careful before they do something debate bro-y. I generally, again, I don't think that this is an endemic debate-wide problem. I think there are a few people, no, let's say a reasonable number of people, who take bad messages away from debates and then become jerks. I think they are likely to still become jerks because these people were jerks before they started debating and likely continue to be jerks after debating. But all of the criticism about debate pros means they are a little less comfortable being obvious jerks. So I think it's not so much that we're producing systemic change in like saving people from the things that debate might do to them. It's just that the jerks who were going to be able to use debates as an excuse to be big jerks now can't do it as easily because they get called out more.
All right. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I think that whoever's in a position of, let's say, as a coach or even as a senior within debate, etc., is sort of responsible for making sure that they foster a better culture, and that includes sort of the toxicity, i.e., I think if a coach is able to, let's say, coach the toxicity out of those high school students in some way by perhaps telling them, being a bit more real about them and their abilities. Like if you have seniors in your university who themselves are not toxic, and therefore, insofar as you kind of look up to them, are yourself not going to end up being toxic if you see that the person who's sort of leading you is also approachable, is amiable, etc., etc. So I think like the few sensible older people have a responsibility to make sure that they're behaving in ways that are good, that are fostering a culture of sort of wholesomeness or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think a big responsibility lies on the older people to always guide the younger ones relatively. Yeah.
All right. I think then. Sorry, Nawaz. Do you have parting thoughts you want to add to the topic?
I mean, I guess I will say this, that if there is any debater who does think that they're very smart because they're great at debating, I would just say that debating is not a game about who is the smartest. It's a game about who persuades the other person the most. I think there are a lot of people who are very smart who probably won't transition into great debating for like numerous reasons. And like so like if you're a good debater, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a very smart person. It just means that you've understood the game very well. You might be smart, and being smart helps, but you're just very persuasive at the game of debating, and it doesn't necessarily even mean that you are persuasive beyond that game, because the game also evolves and the meta changes as well. So yeah, I guess that those are my only last thoughts.
I hope Nawaz's words travel like far and wide, because I think like one of the steps stopping us from becoming the fully fledged professionalized sport that will allow me to travel and observe park teams is how debaters are perceived in the world. But on that point, we will end episode 4. For our Patreon subscribers, this week we continue our 50% off on Imad Hassan showing up at your opponent's house and telling them what a bad motion they set. So keep subscribing and keep sending in money. Next week, we will launch another 30% off on Taha Masood telling you why your speech deserved an 84. So sign up to our Patreon if you haven't already and continue sending in those big bucks. This is Ashar Imran, Taha Imike Masood, Ali Shahid Afridi Khan, and Imad Saeed Ajmal Hassan Jafri signing off from On That Point.